Hello, everyone. Welcome to Clarity 16.0 Supportability Training. In this section, we will review several enhancements. So what's new? We are going to talk about the ability to export the roadmap timeline to PDF. That's been a long-standing request, a very popular request from customers. We've got the ability to configure visual indicators that represent events, such as milestone or other key dates in the roadmap timeline. Also, users have visual indicators that agreements or an agreement dependency is in place, and that's visible from the roadmap timeline. And there's also the added attributes that are now available to sync between roadmaps and the linked investments in the form of roadmap item description, manager, priority, status indicator, stage, and status attributes. So why is this important? So from the roadmap timeline export perspective, roadmaps provide the ability to get the data out from wherever you are. This PDF feature will let you get the data out without having to go to a separate location. And our goal is to minimize reliance on separate BI tools. Roadmap timeline represents the initial PDF export use case. Just from a go forward perspective, we plan to apply the PDF and at some point image export to many places. Test timeline, agreements canvas, which is new in this release. You'll learn more about that tomorrow. Pages with visual badges, you're starting to see that be more pervasive. The hierarchy timeline, etc. From the events perspective, we really are doing this to drive adoption. Users now have that added flexibility to ensure that presentation that's being prepared, the roadmap presentation, right? It's be impactful to executives and management stakeholders. From an agreement perspective, again, to drive adoption, users now have that added visibility to indicate additional business context related to linked investments directly from that roadmap. And then the last item here, the synchronizing additional attributes. This was a quick win that came out of the customer innovation program. And the thought there is that when you're prioritizing and sequencing your roadmap items, you expect to see data from the least linked investments to be in sync. You don't want things to be out of sync. So we've added 6 more attributes that you can synchronize. So what's changed? We'll start there with export to PDF. It's now available directly from the roadmap timeline view. It's not available on the board, it's not available on the grid, but you can see it there as an extra pull-down option from the timeline view. That export file is it's named using the pattern of roadmap name and the saved view that's in use. And then, as you know, roadmaps provide the ability to share progress. And now users can include the exported timeline in presentations or other documents for those important stakeholder communications. Oh, I'll go back. On the image that's there on the right-hand side, you're on your screen looking at Clarity, and you can scroll up or down to look at different, if you have a long or tall roadmap, right? You're not going to see the whole roadmap on the screen. However, when you do output the timeline to PDF, it'll be one page. No matter how tall or wide, you'll see one page of the timeline. Events. So from view options, users can configure visual indicators that represent events, such as milestones or other key dates, and they can pick the image that they want to use, a diamond, a rocket, what have you. Milestones are derived from linked investments having tasks that are defined as key tasks and milestones. Both flags need to be set on that task. The key milestone border or shading matches the roadmap item coloring. The milestone whose shading is filled in Well, that indicates that the task has been completed, or not completed if it's not filled in at the investment level. Users can create date attributes in Studio for, as an example, launch date or release date, and then add those and define those dates at the investment level. Then you would use manage item events to create a corresponding event, which will be positioned on the roadmap using the defined image. There is one out of the box or predefined event, and that's key milestones using the diamond image. Agreements. There's a new option within view options to show agreements. So agreements are really super powerful dependencies, if you will. Agreements are defined in a configurable workspace and establish visibility for investment dependencies, responsible parties, deadlines, and committed dates, to name a few things. You'll learn more about agreements in tomorrow's training session, but I wanted to let you know you can see the agreement icon and dotted dependency lines that indicate investments have formal relationships that are defined in agreement directly on the timeline there. Synchronizing roadmap items. This feature, as I mentioned, was requested as part of the innovation program. So we're really happy to get that in. And the ability to sync roadmap item description, manager, priority, status indicator, stage, and status attributes with linked investments is now available in this release. The new fields have been added to the sync linked item page within the other section. You can see that there on the right-hand side. All right. Um, One thing I wanted to point out is when you're um, moving or adjusting a roadmap timeline, that roadmap, the user experience for moving a roadmap item within the timeline view really has an exciting new look and feel. This UX becomes available when you're changing either the start date only, the end date only, or shifting that roadmap item left or right, or between swim lanes. You get that nice border that kind of tells you, where you are, what you're doing. That the visible date drag guidelines with that extra shading really help the user position the roadmap on the timeline. Okay, let's look at the roadmap capabilities for creating and managing events in the timeline, adding that visual indicator for agreements, again, in the timeline, syncing roadmap items, and then finally exporting that roadmap timeline to a PDF file. So let's go there now. All right, need to log out as Ed, come back in as Ian, and I'll go to the roadmap section, make this a little bit bigger, and we'll click on that roadmap there, and we'll land on the timeline. You can see here the new timeline look and feel that was introduced in the last release with a few of the dependency lines in place here. I can click on that and see the actual point to point really easily. Okay, so let's talk about events. So I'm going to go into view options, and there's a new section over here called events, strangely enough. And you can see two events that are defined, key milestone and launch date. And you can see an image associated with each one of those. I'll go ahead and select those. And you can see the roadmap itself, the timeline has now been updated, and those icons have been put on their respective roadmap items. You can see here the diamond for the key milestone, which I mentioned is coming from linked investments, where those tasks have been defined as a key milestone, as a milestone and a key task. Both of those flags have been set. I can hover on the item, and it tells me what it is and its date. I come up here. This one's not yet completed. Go to market readiness. It's got a date. Um, So those are the icons that are present there. Let me just show you where the start or the completed and not completed information is coming from. I'm going to go over to my one of these guys here, and I'll hit the details panel. And of course, I'm configured with my linked investment. This is a custom investment type. And I'll go to the tasks module. Just click the grid there, and you can see the number of completed items related. This is a straightforward one that's tracking releases from a BRP, QA sign-off, and GA. So I'll just select this guy, this is a BRP. It is done, right? It's October. We should be done. I'll make that adjustment, and the next time that the sync job runs, that will be updated. But you can see the various information. You can also see the rocket icon there. That is referencing a launch date. I have defined custom attribute in Studio and applied it to the projects and product investment types. So let me go to my custom investments. I'll go to products, and on my grid, you can see launch date. So that's a custom attribute that I created of date format. And obviously I defined these launch dates here for these individual products, and that is what is reflected on the roadmap when we look at those icons. So I can just hover on that. It tells me launch date, June 4th, right? So it's not an every one of these. Actually, it is. I thought I just put it on projects, but I put it on projects and products. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so let's take a look how these are actually created. So I'll go into view options again and into manage events or events, and I'll select manage item events. So we've got a pop-up here that allows me to define the event. You can see the various images that are available for a selected event. I can change this one to a triangle, right? You can see the effect of it in the background. I just close that. You can see the triangle replaces all of the diamonds in this case. I'll go ahead and set that one back. I have rocket for launch date. I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. Oops, typed too fast. Release date. I've created another custom date attribute called release date. Put it on products. We'll give that a flag. You can see there are 7 choices here for images for these events. We've considered allowing customers to bring in their own custom images. We're going to kind of hold off on that for a little bit and look for customer feedback to help us prioritize, but we believe we've got a pretty good set here that are usable from an event standpoint. So I've created that event release date for products. Now you need to come back here and turn it on, right? So that when the sync job runs, it'll include it. It just doesn't automatically include it. So how do we make that happen? I'll come over here to item actions, and I'll go to sync linked, and we've got this section right here. This used to be independent checkboxes in the last release for start, finish, etc. But we've just combined that into a single checkbox, and now we have without or with events. If you choose without and run the sync, then your events don't have any date awareness, and so you're going to wipe them out and not show them on the grid. And there may be a logical use case for that, or there is a logical use case for that. I'm going to go ahead and say with events and hit sync. This is one of the banners that comes up, right? Locking me out and warning, telling me that what's happening. So what I wanted to explain while that's happening is you see down here, and it's in other places where there's the diamond, which is showing completed and not completed tasks using the shading. Now, if I switch the key milestone event to a triangle, it will not show the completed and not completed use cases here. That particular logic of completed, not completed is dedicated to the triangle, or sorry, the diamond image. So just be aware of that. If I use, anything other than a diamond for key milestone, I won't get that behavior associated with this visual here, filled in and not filled in. So the job ran, and now I have my flag here that represents a release date. And I put those on products. I didn't put it on projects, so you can see that these product items are here. All right, so that's the demo for um, adding events to your um, to the timeline. Forgive me, I'm a little distracted there. So let's talk about agreements. I'll come over here and I'll go into timeline. This has been updated to show another element here for agreements. So agreements are defined in the configurable canvas and establish visibility for investment to investment dependencies, responsible parties, deadlines, and commitment dates. I'll go ahead and uncheck dependencies and check agreements, and you'll see the change here. Now you're going to learn more about agreements in detail tomorrow, but I wanted to let you know that you can see the agreement icon and the dotted dependency lines that indicate investments have former relationships that are defined in agreement. You can see the icon here, the new icon for dependencies, and then of course, very clear, the visible dotted line here indicates those relationships. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the added capability to sync more fields with their linked investments. We are over here, you may have noticed in the other section, the these additional 6 attributes are here. Description manager, priority stage, status indicator, investment status. Roadmap item, which is essentially name and goal, we're already there. I'll switch over to the grid view and I'll just bring that page up again. Actually, I draw that. You can see the 6 items are here in this roadmap grid, and then my synced items view, description manager priority. So here's those 6 fields are there and synced from their underlying investments. I'm not going to click the button there just because it takes a second here to load. I'll go back to the timeline and I'll click on this bottom digital banking application item and open the details flyout. And you can see I've included one of those new attributes, stage and status indicator, are also available for the flyout in addition to the grid. Okay, so finally, I'm going to demonstrate the ability to export this timeline view to PDF. So this first thing I want to call out is notice that I'm in a view. It's kind of an expanded view, and I do have things off the page, right? I think there was maybe just one line item that's off the page. The PDF export will pick that up. As I mentioned in the grid view, export to PDF is not an option. Going to the board, export to PDF is not an option. However, here in the timeline, it is. You probably saw that when I was clicking on sync linked items a couple of times. So I'll go ahead and select that. You'll get a spinner indicating that it's happening. I can click to a grid view if I want to. It's not going to disturb the process of creating the PDF file. I can navigate away and whatnot. So you can see it. I'm on my Mac. It shows up in the tray here. I'll go ahead and open that. And it opens it up in one page. No matter how wide or tall this is, it'll be one page. You can see the name here in the upper left is using the combination of the roadmap name and the view that was in use. If you wanted to split this into multiple pages, you would have to bring this up in Adobe Acrobat or another equivalent tool to manually go ahead and split that. We are investigating providing additional user controls in a future release to determine pagination and, quite frankly, maybe even landscape versus portrait. But that is something that's coming, but it's not there in this release. Now, if you ran the export to PDF with the flyout open or the legend open, those items are excluded. You'll see that many of the navigation elements are excluded from the output file, and that's by design. The one final comment is that the roadmap timeline represents the first PDF export use case. Kind of the go-forward plan to apply PDF export will include, adding it to task timelines, agreements with the agreements canvas, pages with visual badges, the hierarchy timeline, and more. We have quite a number of places that this would fit nicely, but we're starting here with the timeline. So that concludes the demo of the roadmap updates.